In 2007, a father, William Petit, awoke to a nightmare, two intruders standing over him, their eyes locked onto his. Before he could react, a baseball bat swung down, striking him again and again until he was barely conscious. The men dragged him to the basement, tied him up, then moved upstairs, first entering the room of his wife and restraining her, and then the two daughters. For hours, they tore through the house, searching for valuables. Unsatisfied, one of the men forced the mother to go to a bank with him and withdraw a large sum of money. Meanwhile, the other intruder brutally assaulted the youngest daughter as her sister watched in terror, powerless to stop it. When their mother returned home, the nightmare only worsened. She too got assaulted. Without hesitation, the assailant strangled her, ending her life. Before leaving, the second intruder doused the house and the girls in gasoline. Then, they struck a match. Flames engulfed everything, consuming the home and sealing the family's fate. Bound and beaten, the father somehow mustered the strength to crawl to a neighbor's house, desperate for help. But by then, it was too late. The two monsters behind the massacre, Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komisarjevsky, were later caught and sentenced to life in prison.
On the surface, this is just a photo of a guy enjoying himself at prom, but it has a sinister backstory because on April 29, 1989, right before Jeff Pelly went to his high school prom in Lakeville, Indiana, he got into a dispute with his father, which escalated to Jeff shooting and killing his father with a shotgun, and then to hide his crime, he proceeded to murder his stepmother and two young stepsisters, all over a dispute about prom.
Nothing suspicious about a mum picking up her son from school until you see this photo, and suddenly it's like a horror film unfolding in real life. It was May 2011 in Aurora in Illinois. Timothy Pitson was the most adorable little 6-year-old boy, just a totally normal child, loved playing outside, loved Spider-Man, just loved all things that normal little boys do. He seemed happy, nobody suspected anything was going on behind closed doors. But that day his mum Amy showed up to school and she said to the teacher, "I need to take Timothy, we've had a family emergency." So obviously the teacher was like, okay, fair enough. Certainly nobody suspected that this would end in a death and a missing person. Timothy's dad, bless him, had no idea that anything was going on, no idea that there was this emergency situation and that Timothy had been picked up from school already. So bless him, he was waiting at the end of the school day for Timothy to get off the bus. And he obviously didn't, and then Timothy's dad contacted the school and said, like, "Where is Timothy?" And they said, "Oh, your wife had picked him up because of the family emergency." He was like, "What family emergency?" Alarm bells immediately started ringing. Amy had always been a great mum, but she was known to have suffered with depression, but she'd never done anything like this before. James could not get hold of Amy and was frantic, obviously trying to get hold of his wife and son. In the end, he had to report them missing to the police. But in a very weird turn of events, he then heard of Amy through his brother the following day. And the brother said Amy didn't sound right at all. She was kind of like saying the right things, but it was just in the context completely eerie. He could hear Timothy was playing in the background, but Amy was saying things like, "Timothy is fine, Timothy belongs to me, Timothy is safe." Which sounds like exactly the sort of thing you'd say if Timothy wasn't safe. She reassured the family that they'd be home in a few days, but that she needed, quote, "time to figure out how to approach this," end quote. Approach what, Amy? On the 14th of May, Amy was found dead. She was in a motel in Rockford in Illinois. Now, Amy had clearly done this to herself. It was a very gruesome scene, but it was an obvious self-unaliving. But here's the really creepy part. Timothy was nowhere to be found. How does a 6-year-old boy totally vanish into thin air? There wasn't even any evidence he'd been there to begin with. His little bag was nowhere to be found, no toys. But there was an unsettling S note that said, "You will never find him." But it basically said he was safe and would be taken care of. Police were able to retrace her steps using the CCTV they had and witness accounts, and she'd done the following. She'd got in from school, gone to a car repair shop, weirdly went to a zoo in Chicago, then to a resort in Illinois, then to Kalari Resorts in Wisconsin, then back to Illinois where she ultimately took her life. Eerily, CCTV showed Amy at a market near Rockford on the day before she was found dead, but Timothy was nowhere to be seen on that CCTV. Like I said, Amy was known to have had depression previously. However, it also came out that her and her husband James had had a bit of a disagreement. It seemed that maybe she was in contact with another guy and James had confronted her about this, and they'd got into this big argument about potentially splitting up. There are a bunch of theories about what happened to Timothy, but I'm really interested in what you guys think. Some think that Amy killed him and disposed of his body somewhere and he's just never been found. Others think maybe she was involved in some kind of illegal adoption. Police eventually found Amy's abandoned car, and something in the car was incredibly disturbing to me. There was blood on the front seat and it turned out to be Timmy's blood. However, he was prone to having nosebleeds and it wasn't like a significant amount of blood, so it could have been from a nosebleed. Some random actually did come forward and claim that they were Timmy, but they did a DNA test and they weren't. I feel like people always do that in these situations. It's really sickening to me. What do you guys think? What happened to Timothy Pitson?
One of the most infamous child killers is now free. Eric Smith was just 13 years old in 1993 when he brutally murdered 4-year-old Derek Roby in the woods of Savona, New York. He was tried as an adult and sentenced to 9 years to life in prison, but after years of denied parole hearings, he was finally approved and released in February of 2022 at 42 years old. He spent nearly 3 decades behind bars, and the prosecutor who tried his case calls his release a huge gamble.
This husband was hiding a secret that he was willing to kill to keep. His entire life was a lie, and his pregnant wife had no idea who she was really married to. So this is Mark Hacking. Growing up, Mark was one of 7 kids. Family was very religious. They were part of the Mormon church and they lived outside of Salt Lake City, Utah. As far as I could find, it seemed like Mark had a pretty ideal childhood. But since Mark was very young, he was an attention seeker and a liar, like a huge compulsive liar. Mark was definitely the class clown in school and he wanted all eyes on him. And it was actually when Mark was 17 years old during a camping trip that he met his future wife, 15-year-old Lori Suarez. Like a big dummy, Mark put his entire hand in a campfire as a joke, and he obviously got really burned. Lori came to his aid, did some first aid, and that's how they met. Lori also grew up really religious through the Mormon church, and she was the kind of girl who seemed like she had it all. She was outgoing, friendly, popular, smart, good at sports, and even class president. Her and Mark were high school sweethearts, and they were seen as the perfect couple and like a power couple. After high school, when Mark was 19 years old, he joined the Mormon ministries. I don't know much about this. From what I've read, Mark would be going on a mission trip to Canada with other Mormon boys to try and convert people in Canada to Mormonism. And from what I've read, it seemed like this was like really sacred work in the Mormon church, but almost immediately after getting to Canada, Mark just started breaking all the rules. He was drinking, partying, and also sleeping around, so also he's cheating on his girlfriend Lori back home. Mark was caught and he was kicked out and sent back to Utah, and this was really serious. Apparently Mark's family was a pretty big deal in the Mormon church, and getting kicked out of the ministries is something that will like bring shame upon your family, so this was a really big deal. But with like everything in Mark's life, Mark just found a way to lie himself out of it. Mark and Lori together went to the University of Utah. During that time, they actually got married. Lori graduated college and got a really great job. Mark was in school a little bit longer than Lori because he was actually in the pre-med program. Yes, Mark was going to become a doctor, and his entire family was just full of high achievers. Mark's dad was a doctor, his brother was a doctor, his other brother was an engineer. In 2004, Mark and Lori were 28 and 27 years old. They've been married for 5 years, and Mark finally graduates with his pre-med degree, and he actually gets into a really great med school in North Carolina. And this was a really exciting time for the couple. Mark just got accepted into a great med school. They were about to make this big move from Utah to North Carolina so he can go to med school, and that's a move that's like all the way across the entire country. And it was also at this time that Lori found out that she was pregnant, so this was like such a great time, but it was all about to start crumbling down. On July 16th, 2004, Lori calls this med school in North Carolina to talk about some financial aid options, and the university tells Lori that no one by her husband's name is enrolled in that school, and not only that, no one by her husband's name had even applied to their med school. Can you even imagine being Lori right now? Okay, she's pregnant. She's already given notice at her job that she's gonna be leaving her job because she's planning to move all the way across the country. And for what? She finds out that her husband is lying. She confronts her husband Mark about this, but of course he lies. He says that this has to be some kind of miscommunication. But Lori does not believe Mark, and she starts doing a little bit of digging. And what she finds out is shocking. Turns out her husband Mark did not graduate from that pre-med program. He dropped out of college over 2 years ago. For over 2 years, Mark lied to everyone. For over 2 years, Mark would get up every single day to go to school. He would park down the street, wait till his wife Lori went to work, then he would sneak back home and then just sit on the couch all day and play video games. Dropped out of college because he was too lazy to do the work, but then he put a lot of effort into his lies. He pretended to write papers, he pretended to do homework, he even pretended to be stressed out during finals week. On the day of his graduation ceremony, he pretended to be sick. And then when Mark was applying to all of these med schools, his wife Lori was paying for him to visit all of these schools. So she's paying for him to go on all these trips for nothing because he's not applying to med school because he dropped out of college 2 years ago. I'm so interested to know what Mark's plan was. Like after this, they were about to move across the entire country so Mark could go to med school in North Carolina. Was he gonna pretend to go to med school and then was he gonna pretend to be a doctor? Like what was his plan? Mark and Lori's loved ones even threw them a going away party. During the party, Lori acted like nothing was wrong. She didn't tell anyone that she just found out her husband was lying about everything. After the party's over, Lori pours out all of her feelings in a letter and gives that letter to her husband before going to bed. And in the letter, Lori pretty much threatens divorce if Mark doesn't change and if Mark doesn't admit to everyone about what he's been doing. In the letter, there's still so much hope. Like it definitely seemed like Lori was willing to give her husband another chance, which is much better reaction than I would have had. But Mark did not react well to getting this letter. He actually got really, really mad. And the very next morning after reading this letter, Mark called the police to report his wife Lori as a missing person. Yes, the very next morning, Mark called the police to report that his 27-year-old pregnant wife Lori had gone jogging that morning and never came home. The investigation begins. They find Lori's car abandoned near a park where she usually jogged out, so at first it seemed like Mark's story was checking out. The police want to search Mark and Lori's home, which is very standard when someone goes missing, and Mark agrees and he lets the police in. In the home, they find Lori's purse, all of her belongings, her wedding ring, and her car keys. And at this point, Lori's car had already been found. So if Lori's car is found abandoned, how did her car keys end up back in her house? Something else really strange, the mattress that was on Mark and Lori's bed was brand new. You won't even believe this. They found a receipt that proved that Mark bought that mattress that was on his bed 16 minutes after calling to report his wife as a missing person. Literally, who does that? Who calls 911 to report their wife as a missing person and then go to the mattress store down the street and buy a new mattress? And also, where's the old mattress? And if that's not suspicious enough, in the nightstand next to their bed, they found a sharp weapon that was covered in Lori's blood. This is like the most guilty I've ever seen someone, and what's so crazy is that the police didn't have a search warrant. Mark let the police in, and he didn't have to, and he let them in knowing that all that evidence was in his house. And because I already told you that Mark loves attention, he did a lot of on-camera interviews where he pretended to cry for his missing pregnant wife.
I called her at about 10 o'clock to just say hi, see how she was doing, and they told me she... Sorry, she needed back to work. Anybody who can come. Please come tomorrow morning. I don't think they're going to let the volunteers up there tonight, but we're going to start at 6:30 tomorrow morning, and anybody who can possibly, if you can make it, please come.
And they did find their old mattress. It was in a dumpster down the street from their house, and the entire middle of the mattress had been cut out. And at this point, Mark knows that the police are onto him. He knows that he's going to be caught. So he needs to find a way to lie himself out of this. Mark is going to try and fake being insane. This is so crazy. I cannot believe that this actually happened. Mark actually took off all of his clothes and ran around in public to try and prove that he was too crazy to be held responsible. Mark was brought to a psychiatric facility while the police continued to investigate and dig into his background, and it was only then that it was revealed to everyone that Mark's entire life was a huge lie. And this was so shocking for his entire family, so much so that 2 of Mark's older brothers decided to go visit him in the hospital to try and find out the truth. And for probably the first time in Mark's entire life, he told the truth, and he confessed to his brothers about everything. He obviously told them about the lying, but he also told them about how he killed his wife Lori, his pregnant wife, while she slept so he could try and keep his secrets from coming out. And then he put his pregnant wife's body in a dumpster, like her and their unborn child were just trash to him, because he was hoping that they would be taken to the landfill and no one would find them. But for 2 months, they searched the landfill and they did find Lori. Mark took a plea deal and he was sentenced to 6 years to life in prison, which apparently was only the maximum sentence in the state at the time, but because of this case, the law was changed and now the maximum sentence is 15 years to life in prison. And Mark will be eligible for parole in 10 years in 2035. This case is so heartbreaking, it's so senseless and selfish, and this guy just really makes me sick. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and while you're there, let me know what case you want to see me cover next, and until then, I will see you guys in my next video.
I'm sorry, but you mean to tell me that he stabbed himself 36 times with a pocket knife and then laid face down in a creek and voluntarily drowned? Because that's what happened to Jonathan Luna, a federal prosecutor in Baltimore. The FBI believes that he took his own life, even though local authorities are adamant that he didn't. So many things don't add up about this case, like how he was found dead underneath his car in the creek. There was a lot of blood in the backseat of his car, suggesting that he was hurt back there while someone else was driving. And not to mention, someone else's blood was found at the scene. This is the mysterious death of Jonathan Luna, and it is still unsolved, so let's talk about it. Jonathan Luna was 38 years old when he very mysteriously died in 2003. He was extremely smart, working as an assistant United States attorney in Baltimore, where he lived with his wife and 2 kids. At the time of his death, Jonathan was working on a case involving a Baltimore rapper who was accused of running a violent drug ring out of his music studio. Up until this point, nothing really seemed out of the ordinary to those who knew him. But this brings us to December 3rd, 2003. At around 9:30 that night, Jonathan was at his office at the Baltimore courthouse working late like usual. He left a message for the defense attorneys about the case that they were working on, and then he went back inside of his office to finalize some agreements. In the message, Jonathan told his colleagues that he would fax these agreements over ASAP, but they never came. And this is where this bizarre story really starts. Jonathan left his office that night at around 11:30 p.m. in his silver 2003 Honda Accord, but he never made it home. It was like he just vanished into the night, and his wife reported him missing early the next morning. But she didn't have to wait long for answers, because another part of this mystery was already unfolding in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. A disturbing discovery connected to this case, one that would only bring more questions than answers. At around 5:30 that morning, an employee at a well drilling company just off of Dry Tavern Road in Pennsylvania saw something in the creek behind the building. He had just arrived at work and was the first one there, and it was still dark out, so he wasn't exactly sure what he was seeing. But as he got closer, he realized that in the creek was a silver 2003 Honda Accord. The car was idling, the front end of it was completely in the creek, and the lights were off. When he walked up to the car, blood was spattered all over the inside, so he quickly called 911. When police arrived at the scene, they found that the car belonged to Jonathan Luna, a federal prosecutor in Baltimore, and then they found his body face down in the creek underneath his car. He was wearing a suit with a black overcoat, and his court ID was around his neck. It was a really gruesome scene because Jonathan had been stabbed 36 times in the chest and neck, and he suffered from a head injury. So after this discovery, his wife was notified, and this obviously came as a huge shock to her, but it raised the question on why he was at that specific location in the first place. So an investigation began, and the FBI quickly joined. They had to hurry and collect evidence because a massive snowstorm was about to hit, and literally by the next morning, 10 inches of snow had pretty much buried the crime scene. A huge pool of blood was found in Jonathan's back seat all over the floor, and blood was smeared on the outside of the driver's door and the front of the car. But here's the thing. Even though Jonathan had been stabbed 36 times in the head and chest, an autopsy found water in his lungs, meaning his ultimate cause of death was drowning. So after sustaining all of those injuries, he somehow went face down in the creek under his car and died by drowning. One thing that was missing from the scene though was the murder weapon, which was obviously a knife. But what's odd though is that a second blood type was found in Jonathan's car, as well as a partial print that didn't belong to him. The Lancaster County coroner's immediate thought and public statement was that it appeared Jonathan was tortured, and their first thought was that it could have had something to do with his job as an attorney. He did have some defensive wounds on his hands, but not nearly the amount that they expected him to have if he was being tortured, and that alone was odd. According to the coroner, a lot of his stab wounds were superficial, but a handful of them were deep enough to cause internal bleeding and serious injuries. Local authorities on the scene believe that Jonathan's car may have been left in neutral, and then there was a physical attempt from someone to push it into the creek and on top of his body. body. So because of all of this evidence, the coroner ruled Jonathan's death as a homicide by drowning, which the FBI did not agree with. But even so, they began digging into the night he went missing before his body was found, and luckily they were able to piece together a timeline of his last movements. According to the FBI, Jonathan left his office alone at around 11:30 that night. After leaving that message, he did get a phone call back, and he somehow left the office without a cell phone or glasses. This stood out as odd to his wife and investigators because Jonathan needed his glasses to drive, especially at night. But according to authorities, he left the office alone, got in his car, and then drove away. He then traveled through Delaware to the Philadelphia area, in some places using his Easy Pass, and then he switched after 3 toll interchanges to buying toll tickets. At 12:57 a.m., $200 was withdrawn from his bank account from an ATM at the JFK Plaza Service Center in Newark. At 2:47 a.m., he crossed the Delaware River toll bridge to the Pennsylvania Turnpike. And at 3:20 a.m., his debit card was used to buy gas at a Sunoco gas station at the King of Prussia Service Plaza. Investigators then went to said gas station to review security footage. And although they couldn't spot him or his vehicle because the CCTV footage was really grainy, the attendant working that night did confirm that Jonathan bought gas for his car there. But then the attendant said something that kind of turned this investigation upside down. He said that Jonathan also bought gas for a second vehicle. This was less than 3 hours before his body was found, and the biggest question was what happened after he left this gas station to when his body was discovered. Investigators found one last piece of evidence, and this came from a toll ticket that he got at 4:04 a.m. after he got off the turnpike. This toll ticket had a spot of blood on it, leading authorities to conclude that at this point in time, Jonathan was already injured. This was about 1 hour before his body was found, but then after this, there's no evidence of anything. Local police thought that maybe he experienced some car trouble that night, and whoever stopped to help him ended up killing him. But it almost seems as if he knew his killer, if he bought gas for them too that night. Local police and the coroner all believed that he was murdered, but despite all of this evidence, the FBI was adamant that he must have ended his own life. They had a few reasons for thinking this, one of which was his major lack of defensive wounds. A lot of his wounds were shallow, which they considered to be hesitation marks from someone who was unsure about ending their life. And then they found out that Jonathan was about to take a polygraph test regarding $36,000 that went missing from one of the cases that he prosecuted. Then they dug a little deeper and found that he had a secret credit card that his wife didn't know about that was $25,000 in debt. And he had recently been on an adult dating site looking for sex. If that was truly him or just someone using his name, they don't know. But then previous colleagues started coming forward and said that in the weeks leading up to his death, Jonathan seemed really distracted at work. And according to them, Jonathan was actually on the verge of being fired. One of the biggest questions that stumped investigators was why he was in Pennsylvania that night. And they did kind of find a reason, but again, it really only raises more questions. In the months leading up to his death, police found that Jonathan had traveled to Pennsylvania a lot, and he even told his dad that he was working on a case there. But Jonathan had no official court business there, so whatever he was doing, no one really knows. This seemed clear to the FBI at least, that Jonathan ended his own life with all of the shady stuff going on behind the scenes and at work. And they even asked the coroner to change the manner of death to suicide, but thankfully they refused. Fast forward 2 months into the investigation. This is when police did a second sweep of the crime scene, and they found something very important that they somehow missed the first time: the murder weapon, which was a penknife. This finding truly makes me question how they missed it the first time and if it could have possibly been planted. Over the years, there's been a lot of speculation about this case, whether or not he took his own life or if he was murdered. Some think that he tried to fake his own kidnapping for some reason and then just went too far, accidentally killing himself. Others believe that he was truly murdered, which a lot of the evidence suggests that he was. The biggest factor being the blood in his back seat and the fact that he was found face down in the creek underneath his car. To me, that seems like someone intentionally ran him over or pushed his car on top of him. Some think what happened to him may have been connected to his job, and the FBI agents investigating the case were corrupt and trying to hide what Jonathan was privately working on. Officially, his manner of death remains a homicide, but there have never been any suspects or any real motive for anyone to do this. Police say that this is still an active and ongoing investigation, even today. In 2006, new information was released by an author who reportedly interviewed the mortician on this case. In this new information, the mortician said that Jonathan had knife wounds to his back and rugged wounds to his private area. To me, it seems clear that whatever happened to him was not by his own doing. And it's just crazy that after all this time, the case is essentially cold and there aren't any leads. But it's now been 22 years, and whatever happened to Jonathan that cold winter night remains a mystery.
How does a child go missing and come back back as a totally different child. This case will blow your mind, I swear. This is stranger than fiction. It was summer 1912 and a family called the Dunbar family were just off on a day trip to a local lake in Louisiana. The baby of the family was 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar, and he was a well-behaved child. He was lovely. He'd never been in any trouble before. He was super excited about the day out until he vanished. Now, his parents searched high and low, as you would, but found absolutely nothing, not even a trace of little Bobby. So obviously immediately they contacted the police, and locals were desperately trying to help this family do anything that they could to try and find their son. But despite the presence of loads of volunteers, nobody could find anything. Even when police started heartbreakingly searching through bodies of water just to see whether this had been a terrible accident and he'd fallen and drowned. He couldn't have gone far, he was only 4. But if he'd had a tragic accident, surely his body would show up. The family were absolutely heartbroken, as they would be, until 8 months later when, miraculously, Bobby showed up. He was randomly with a man in Mississippi. This man was William Cantell Walters, and when police questioned him, he seemed super confused. He was like, no, this isn't missing Bobby, this is my little nephew that I'm looking after for my sister, who's his mum. He was like, this little boy's called Bruce. Absolutely nothing was adding up. He was convinced this was his nephew, he looked after him regularly while his mum went off to work, and he couldn't understand why he was in trouble with police. But police weren't buying it and they arrested him. And the reunion between Bobby and his family seemed slightly awkward. It'd only been 8 months, but obviously kids grow so much when they're little, but everybody just seemed a little bit unsure. The mum was like, right, let me check, because Bobby's got a few marks on his body that I know for a fact that if this little boy has got these marks, that's Bobby. They were like certain moles and scars and things, and she checked, and sure enough, Bruce had Bobby's marks. So she was like, right, this is definitely my son. Yes, the moles, the scars, they're there. So it was like, perfect, happy families again. We're going to charge this random William guy in Mississippi with a crime. But this wasn't the end of it, because the mum back in Mississippi was adamant. She was like, no, that is my biological son. But sadly, she couldn't afford legal fees to fight for the rights to her child, what she was saying was her child. So the Dunbars continued their life with Bobby back. And the bloke who apparently stole him was then shoved in prison. Now, years and years rumbled on, and William in prison always maintained his innocence right up until the day he died. It wasn't until 2004 that we finally got some answers. At this point, Bobby had grown up, had his own family, his own kids, and his son, Bobby Dunbar Jr., decided to, once and for all, I'm going to do a DNA test. This wasn't obviously available back when Bobby went missing. The DNA from Bobby Dunbar Jr. was compared to the DNA from his so-called cousin. This was an official member of the Dunbar family. And guess what? He wasn't blood related to any of the Dunbars. This wasn't missing Bobby, it was actually Bruce. He'd been taken away from his family in Mississippi off a hunch and just given to this grieving Dunbar family. That poor uncle ended up in prison for literally just telling the truth. He was looking after his nephew. And Bruce's poor mum had her child snatched away from her and given to another family because she couldn't afford the legal fees. Which begs the question, what happened to Bobby Dunbar?
So I'm gonna tell you how this woman died, and then I want you to tell me if you think this was just an accident, because the police are saying it was, but I'm just not buying it. So in the early morning hours of November 19th, 2011, 20-year-old Jalea Davis was found dead laying in the middle of the road on Interstate 77 near Parkersburg, West Virginia. One of her legs was broken in half, bone exposed, her right breast was missing, and she had been decapitated. Her car was found parked a little ways down the road near mile marker 181, still running, doors locked, and the right side passenger window smashed open. Police say that she must have hit the guardrail and then was somehow ejected out of this window, and then run over by her own car. But the damage to her car wasn't that bad, yet the trunk and inside was covered in blood. And the weirdest part, Jalea was naked from the waist up, and her bloodied coat and bra were neatly draped over the guardrail next to her body. Police say she died of just a tragic road accident, but so much evidence suggests that this was a major cover-up, and I'm personally not buying the accident theory, so Let's talk about it. Julia Davis was 20 years old when she suddenly and very mysteriously died in 2011. She left her home on the evening of November 18th at around 5 p.m. to go and hang out with some new friends that she recently made. Her friends were Kristen, Jordan, Freddie, and Katie, and she'd only known them for about 3 months. So after leaving that night, Julia went to Kristen's house at around 7 p.m. and the two baked cookies and then got ready to go to a house party in Parkersburg, West Virginia. The two friends got to the house party at around 9 p.m. where they met up with Jordan and Freddie, who were already there. They all hung out for about 2 hours before they all piled into a car and went to pick up their fifth friend Katie at a nearby Hardee's. They made a quick stop at the store to buy some more alcohol, and then they all went back to the house party where they continued to drink and have fun. According to Kristen, Julia was drinking a lot and had like 16 shots, but to others, Julia didn't seem that drunk. A few hours into the party is when the night kind of starts to take a turn. It was reported that at some point, Katie's ex-boyfriend showed up and he and Julia were flirting and dancing together, which angered Katie. At around 3 a.m., they all left the party, and it was around this time that some kind of altercation occurred that altered the rest of the night. The original plan was for Julia to stay the night with Kristen, but at around 3:23 a.m., Julia called her sister and asked her to come and pick her up at a gas station instead. Her sister could hear Kristen in the background, and then Julia turned to her and said, quote, "Give me the keys," end quote. The call then ended, but just a few minutes later, Julia called her sister back, and this time around she was audibly hysterical, like something really bad had happened. She was calling Kristen a bad friend and a bunch of really bad names, and now she wanted to be picked up at a different location, which was a rest stop near Williamstown. Julia's sister asked her what happened and tried to calm her down, but all Julia said was that she would tell her everything when they were together. But sadly, Julia never got the chance to tell her, because within 15 minutes she would be killed under extremely mysterious circumstances. Her sister tried driving out to the rest stop, but she couldn't find Julia, and she even tried calling her a few times and got no response. So she called Kristen, the last known person to be with her, but she too said that she didn't know where Julia went after they split up. During this period of 15 minutes, 3 911 calls would be placed, and this is when things start to get strange. So at 3:48 a.m., a truck driver called 911 to report a possible car accident. He found a car near mile marker 181 on Interstate 77, motionless but still running. The back end of it, though, was covered in blood. He got out of his car and walked a little bit further down the road and told the operator that he could see what he thought was a mangled deer in the middle of the road. He was hoping that that's what it was at least, but then he got closer, and what he saw was something straight out of a nightmare. Lying in the oncoming left-hand lane was Julia's contorted body. Her leg was broken, snapped in half, and what's odd is that she was naked from the waist up. Her right breast was missing and she'd been decapitated. This was obviously a really gruesome scene, but what police found once they arrived is mind-boggling. What's horrible to think about, though, is that Julia's sister stumbled across the crime scene before police were able to get there, and she saw her sister's mangled body and head. Something immediately caught her attention, though, as well as the truck drivers, because right next to Julia's body was her white bloodied coat and her bra, neatly folded over the guardrail, which it doesn't take a genius to know, but if you've been decapitated, there's no way that you would have been able to proceed to take off your own clothes and drape them over the railing before dying. So then the Wood County Sheriff's Department gets there. They noticed that Julia's car was about 1/10 of a mile down the road from where her body was found. Like I said, it was still running with the headlights on, but all of the doors were locked and the driver's side airbag was deployed. On top of this, the passenger side window was smashed open, and this car was completely bloodstained. There was blood all over the back of her car and in the trunk, as well as in the passenger wheel well, under the car, and in a broken headlight. To make things even stranger, there was a large bloody handprint on the inside of the driver's door handle and on the armrest. Police then found a second person's DNA on the shift plate. To me, this indicates that either someone was already injured inside the car before crashing, or someone else was at the crime scene before her body was discovered and went back inside Julia's car. This lines up with the way her clothes were found neatly draped over the railing, because how in the world would her clothes have fallen off from a car wreck like that? They just wouldn't. But for how badly Julia was injured, you'd think that the damage to her car would be pretty significant, right? Well, it wasn't. In fact, it didn't really look that damaged given the circumstances. The crime scene itself was enough to raise major red flags, though, because first you have her clothes being tampered with, but then police found acceleration marks leading away from a pool of blood and Julia's body. This suggests that at the very least, someone else was at the scene before the 911 call was placed. So police investigated, but it didn't take them them long to rule Julia's death as an accident, even with the second DNA found in the car. According to authorities, they believe that Julia was driving her own car drunk and struck the guardrail. They assume that she wasn't wearing a seatbelt and somehow got ejected from the car out of the passenger side window, and then she was run over by her own car. After being hit by her own car, police say that her body then somehow rolled into the oncoming lane and was then struck again by a tractor trailer. Officially, the case is closed, stating that Julia died of a tragic road accident, and the alcohol was a contributing factor. They backed this up with the toxicology report that showed her blood alcohol level as 0.19, which is over twice the legal limit. They say no foul play was involved, yet some things still don't really add up, such as her friends' statements, the ones that were with her right before she died. They all seem to reportedly change a few times, and when Kristen was interviewed the first time, she voluntarily told the police how she thinks Julia died, which didn't add up at all and is just a really weird thing to say. And even though this doesn't necessarily mean anything, right after this she lawyered up. A lot of people, including Julia's family, believe that she was murdered and that this was a huge cover-up. A lot of people feel this way because 3 of the 4 friends that were with Julia that night have family in law enforcement. Specifically Kristen, whose grandpa was a sheriff at the same police department that was investigating Julia's death. And it doesn't make it any better when, not long after her friend's death, Kristen goes on to make tweets like this. It's just not right to be rude to a family, especially publicly when they are experiencing such a major loss like this. Julia's family believes that she was run over by her own car with someone else driving, possibly multiple times with how badly she was injured. And one of the main reasons they feel that someone else was involved was the way Julia's clothes were found. They were pretty bloody, but it looked like someone maybe wiped their own bloody hands on them before hanging them over the railing. This is all very suspicious, and then you have reports of her friends reportedly telling other people in town incriminating details about that night, details that they never mentioned to police. It's just crazy to me that what happened to Julia and how gruesome it was happened within a 15-minute time frame, and the fact that we don't know what exactly happened between Julia and Kristen that caused her to be so upset. Some think it was because her friends were trying to keep her car keys from her in order to prevent her from driving drunk, and that's why she said, "Give me the keys." But it also doesn't make sense on how she was hit with her own car like investigators say. You have police telling you that it was an accident on one hand, but on the other, there's so much evidence suggesting foul play was involved. Her mom has gone on to create this Facebook page in hopes of finding justice for her daughter, and she also has this GoFundMe to help continue funding her private investigation, as well as a petition to get Julia's case reopened. If you feel so inclined, you can show your support in these ways, or simply just sharing Julia's story with everyone you know. Someone definitely knows something, and her family deserves justice. But it's now been 14 years, and whatever happened to Julia at mile marker 181 remains a mystery.